Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to speak virtually today, and I thank my colleague from Nanaimo, Ladysmith, for this opportunity to split the time. I also want to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territory of the Saanich Nation, part of the Coast Salish nations of the beautiful area of Saanich Gulf Islands. Over time, perhaps we could change the name Saanich to a Saanich to spell it in SENCOTEN, because that is the source of the named Saanich Peninsula, where I'm honored to represent the wonderful constituents of this area. I'm taking a different approach to this look at Bill C-14, and I'm afraid to say that I think I may end up being very boring. That's because we have before us really important legislation. I wish it had been passed long ago when it first came forward, because it does provide important supports, as my colleague from Nanaimo, Ladysmith, said, that we will support from the Green Party. Supports for low and middle income Canadians, relief on student debt, more support for virtual care, mental health, substance programs, substance abuse programs. There are helps for businesses and their rents. These are things that we would like to have seen passed, but that doesn't mean we don't have some significant concerns about the fall economic statement and the upcoming budget. And this is where I'm afraid I'm going to perhaps be boring. I'd love to give a speech to make to the point that my colleague from the Bloc Québécois just made, that our recovery needs to be focused on renewable energy, needs to be focused on a green economic recovery, needs to actually hit our Paris commitments to hold to 1.5 degrees, which the current government legislation in C-12 doesn't come close to ensuring that we have anything like accountability. But I want to focus rather on the question of what is our role as parliamentarians when we look at budgets? What's our role as parliamentarians when we look at the fall economic statement? What's our job? Now, in theory, and as some of you will know, whenever I start speaking in the House of Commons and tell you what's supposed to be happening in theory, you can be pretty sure it's not what's happening in practice. In theory, parliamentarians are responsible for the public purse. We're responsible as one of our core jobs as members of parliament to control the public purse. Now, if you're going to control the public purse, it suggests that you actually know about the measures that you're voting for, that you're actually able to analyze a budget. You're actually able to get enough information to be effective and responsible as parliamentarians. Speaking in general first, and then zooming in on the specifics, I say that in my experience of reading budgets, and that goes back to well before I became honored to be elected in this place in 2011. I used to go to pre-budget lockups. When I was the executive director of Sierra Club of Canada, I was one of the founders of something called the Green Budget Coalition, and sit down with the Minister of Finance and work through budgets after the fact. And in pre-budget lockups, I would usually bring previous year's budgets with me so that I could quickly reference. I could see which department's getting more money, which department's getting less money. What does this look like in terms of our, just accountability? Where's the money going? I've been trying to remember the last time I saw a budget that actually included the numbers. Now, this will strike Canadians as odd. How can you have a fall economic statement? How can you have a budget that doesn't include the numbers? Well, there are numbers there, but they tend to be unrelated one from the other. I noted it was back in December of 2015. In preparing for the speech, I found a column that I remembered that was written by three friends of mine, actually. Kevin Page, our former parliamentary budget officer, Bob Plamondon, who's a noted conservative commentator, and former MP and friend Pat Martin. They penned an article for the Globe and Mail on this very point. Members of Parliament don't have enough information to actually do the job we're supposed to do, controlling the public purse. Just to quote from that article from three colleagues, they wrote, "It's well nigh impossible for mere mortals to follow the money," unquote. It is well nigh impossible. We used to have budgets where you actually could add up the various departmental budgets and get to a number that was what the government was actually going to spend. Departmental budgets stopped appearing in the spring budgets sometime, I think, after Stephen Harper became prime minister. I've been trying to remember the last time I actually got a budget to read that included what most people would consider a budget. For some time, I've said we should stop calling the budget, which we'll see next week, April 19th, or the fall economic statement, but the fall statement, spring budget. I think that unless the new Minister of Finance is going to do something remarkable and actually give us the numbers, what we've had for many years now has been what I've referred to as the big, thick spring brochure. It's about party policy. It's about governmental policy. It sometimes announces we're going to spend this much in this area and that much in that area, but there's nothing that you can use for purposes of comparison. Is that new money? Is that from a departmental A base that they had last year? Is it just being reallocated? Can you track what's being spent, where the priorities are, and do you add this all up and get a number you can count on? Now, on top of that general statement of a lack of transparency around numbers, now we have gone from what was spent in the 2019-2020 budget frame, that was $363 billion. In 2020 to 2021, we're spending something on the order of $642 billion. Now, this was all approved by us as parliamentarians and mostly by unanimous consent. Because of the nature of COVID, we worked fast, and goodness knows I'm nothing but praise for all the hardworking civil servants, and I include our ministers. Everyone's worked very hard to roll out the programs. But by this point, more than a year into the pandemic, we should know how those programs are doing and where the money has actually gone. So if you look at this, we now have, believe it or not, over 90 different new COVID emergency programs. Can you trace that? Can you track that? Do we know where the money is going? In big numbers, in a rough sense, we do, because we know how much went to CERB and how much went to wage supports and so on. But when you, and again, I turned to Kevin Page. I referenced him earlier, but he, of course, was our first parliamentary budget officer and is now the president of the Institute for Fiscal Studies and Democracy at University of Ottawa. And in December, he put forward an opinion piece again, looking at the fall economic statement and identifying the transparency gaps. So again, looking at the fall economic statement, Kevin Page said, quote, "There is limited, disaggregated administrative data related to people, sectors, and regions, and virtually no data and analysis of the monthly flow of supports." Now, are other countries, my colleague from Nanaimo, Ladysmith, mentioned other countries that have done better at getting to zero on COVID, as opposed to trying to just flatten the curve to avoid having our emergency rooms overwhelmed. Other countries decided to actually try to eliminate the virus. Well, here we are. Some of those countries that did better than us have also done better on financial reporting. So New Zealand publishes very clear visuals that any citizen can use to track and understand where the money is being spent. Australia publishes detailed monthly reports explaining their statistics. So does the UK. All of these countries provide more information. The United States provides a detailed dashboard so that any citizen can track all government programs from one place. Canada doesn't have any of that in place for people to track where the money is going in terms of by sector. Like, we know in general, this kind of money went to individuals because it was the CERB. This kind of money went to businesses because they were employers, but we don't have details. On the fall economic statement, our current parliamentary budget officer, Yves Giroux, commented favorably on the fact that the fall economic statement does include clarity around some essential fiscal planning information, such as the detailed 5-year fiscal outlook. But Mr. Giroux also commented, as had, I'm going to wrap up now, Madam.
I just want to remind the member she's not to use names of individuals that sit in the House of Commons.
Did I use the name of anyone sitting in the House of Commons? I'm sorry. I referred to Mr. Giroux, the parliamentary budget officer. Yeah, he and his comment was, quote, that the statement falls short on transparency in several areas, such as the absence of a fiscal anchor, the lack of clear thresholds for the fiscal guardrails, and the lack of detail related to the employment insurance operating account. So these are areas that I hope we can address.
Questions and comments? And I do want to apologize to the honourable member. I thought she had mentioned somebody in the House of Commons. That's what it sounded like, but it was Mr. Giroux and not the Prime Minister's name I had heard. Questions and comments? The honourable member for, I believe it's Langley Aldergrove, is it?
Cloverdale, Langley City.
Cloverdale, Langley City. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It appears that Bill C-14 is specifically designed so that the government will be able to operate without tabling a budget, which seems to be how they keep on working. We've been watching unhinged borrowing by the Liberals, which the finance minister described as preloaded stimulus to cover up the fact that COVID support programs by far overpaid those who didn't even need the help. Now, Part 7 of Bill C-14 is an alarming blank check for the Liberals. And I'm wondering, does my colleague believe that this government has the capacity to lead us out of this economic disaster without unnecessary new levels of debt?
Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you. I would say that I can't agree with my honourable colleague that Part 7 is a blank check. It is a borrowing limit, but it is not authority to spend. And that's a very important distinction to be made. I am troubled, as I think many MPs are, as many Canadians are, by the fact that we're in a third wave. I live in a province where the P1 variant has become extremely prevalent. A member of my family was diagnosed positively with COVID today. I'm extremely worried for all of us. I think that I have to have confidence in us as a people, which means I don't want to take pot shots at my government. I think we can get through this, but we do need financial transparency. We as MPs need to do our job. It's been a long time since we've actually studied the supplementary estimates before passing them by rote. I think we need to do our jobs.
Questions
and comments. The Honourable Member for Lac Saint-Jean. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague, the member for Saanich Gulf Islands. I always enjoy listening to her speeches. They're always very solidly rooted in strong arguments. Now, she talked about being responsible for the public purse, and I agree with her. She said there was a lack of transparency on the part of the government, and I agree with her. But we also know where the money went over the last 4 years. For example, the oil and gas sector got a lot of money. The Liberal government's strategy was to invest $4 billion compared to only $900 million in forestry. So it is difficult to see their success here. So I'd like to hear my colleague talk a little bit about that. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I also want to thank my colleague from the Bloc Québécois. I entirely agree with him. We currently have a government who thinks that they can be leaders on the great issue of climate change, but at the same time, they are protecting these huge subsidies to fossil fuel industries. For example, $17 billion for one single pipeline, the Trans Mountain Pipeline. So we need to eliminate those subsidies in order to protect industries that are really going to help us in the future.
For a brief question, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, so thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is related to Canada's vastness. As a very large country with many different regions, there has been a very important role, and this is something that compares quite different than other smaller European countries, for example, where there's provincial responsibilities in terms of lockdowns to the different warnings and so forth. And I'm wondering if the former leader could provide her thoughts in regards to the importance of federal provincial cooperation in combating the pandemic.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands has about 30 seconds to respond.
Okay, I thank my friend, the parliamentary secretary, for the question. Look, we have, as my friend from Nanaimo, Ladysmith, just said, we have real challenges in federal-provincial relations. The European Union, with separate nation states, does a better job on trade within individual nation states than we do interprovincially. And those frictions have really lost lives in this pandemic because the federal government, the provincial governments have not worked as well together as for instance, the state governments in Australia worked with their national state government. And that is a tragedy.